Hi there. This video is for teachers teaching music or piano, and especially how to read music on the music staff. So let's get started. Here you have the staff with the 5 lines and the keys on the lines, and again keys between the lines or on the 4 spaces that are created between those 5 lines. So make sure to simplify it for the student. Explain that we only have 2 categories on how we write the music keys: on the line and between the lines or the spaces. Students like the example when I give them, like, this is a house that has 4 floors. This is the first floor, between the first and the second line, the first space. The second space is the second floor, third floor, fourth floor. Then you can have the attic or the basement, which is below the 5 lines. Make sure then, since we are talking about how to read music, so you're actually talking to their visual, to their optical part of the brain to understand it, make sure to draw them in front of them, those 2 categories of keys, and then ask them to draw them again with you. Make sure to explain to them that the keys that are on the line, their head is exactly in the middle of the line. Like you have a pizza and you're dividing it into equal parts. Not on top of the line and not below the line, but exactly on the line. It's like as if it is grabbing the line. And draw it with them. First line, we're counting from the bottom, top. Second line, third, fourth, and fifth line. Then move on to the spaces. First space or first floor of the house, second floor or second space, third space, fourth space. You don't need to write down a lot of keys. Make it simple. They don't need to learn in their first lesson of how to read music all the piano keyboards, all the octaves. And again here, make sure that they don't trespass these lines, that they stay in between the lines. Not like that, but staying exactly in between the lines. And ask them again to draw it. Now again, draw the 5 keys that are located in the 5 lines, and in between them, in broken lines, draw the keys that they are jumping. From the first line to the second, we're jumping the first space. From the second line to the third line, we're jumping the second space. And so forth until the last line. Do the same for the spaces. Write them down, those 4 keys that are on the 4 spaces. And in between them, in broken lines, the keys that they are jumping. Between the first and the second space, we're jumping the second line. Between the second space and the third, we're jumping the third line, etc. And then show them on the piano, because what they see visually while reading the music, they will see the exactly same thing happening on the piano keyboard. Here we have first line, E key. Second line, I'm jumping 1 key and going to the second line. Here, I jump this key and went to the second line. Jumping another key, going to the third line. Jumping another key, going to the fourth line. Jumping another key, going to the fifth line. And what do I have in the middle? I have the 4 spaces. First space, second, third, fourth. And in between I have those 3 keys that I'm jumping that are on the second line, the third, and the fourth line. And then explain to them that these 2 categories when we put them all together in a row in a consecutive order, are exactly all the keys in a row on the piano keyboard, starting from E, first line, F, first space, G, second line, A, second space, B, third line, and so forth, and then play it on the piano. First line, first space, second line, second space, third line, third space, and until the fifth line. So these are the two categories combined together in a consecutive order. Then draw it with them. Draw it for them and then ask them to draw it with you. Make sure that they started on the first line. They're jumping, they should understand what key they're jumping visually, and then moving on to the second line. That here they jumped the first space. To move on to the third line, they jumped the second space. Same thing for the spaces. To go from first space to the second space, we jumped that key that is located in between them, which is on the second line. Third space, from the second space to the third, I jumped the key that is located on the third line. And then make them draw one by one all the keys in a consecutive order. First key, first line, first space, second line, second space, third line, third space, and so forth. And then you can give the same example with the bass clef. Again, 5 keys in the 5 lines and the 4 keys in the 4 spaces, and combine them all together. Introduce the bass clef since the beginning. Now draw for your student both clefs, the treble clef and the bass clef, and only those 5 keys. 5 keys on the treble clef and 5 keys on the bass clef. Use an example of landmarks, where the land is our piano keyboard and the marks are the musical maps that are going to orientate us on this land. The treble clef is the musical map that we use for the keys that are located from the middle range until the highest pitches, and the bass clef again from the middle range until the lowest pitches, the lowest keys on the piano. Starting with the C in the middle, exactly where we're sitting on the piano keyboard, or on the 4th octave, the middle C, here, only making sure that the student understands that on the treble clef it's written below the 5 lines, and on the bass clef it's written on top of those 5 lines, but it's the same key on the piano, on our land. It's the same exact key. And again, using the system line, space, line, space, line, all in a consecutive order. It goes up or to the right of the piano keyboard. C, space, line, and again going down on the bass clef. Line, space, line, and again together. You can introduce it from the first lessons of a piano beginner student, so that they don't have to get used to one map and then all of a sudden after some lessons you give them a second map and they have to kind of relearn how to orientate themselves on the piano keyboard. Show it from the beginning so that they understand that this is all relative. It's just a map. It's an additional help for them to understand where exactly, how high or how low or how in the middle they're going to play on the piano keyboard. Give your students exercises where they have to play from one line or one space, whichever one you want, different keys. Like here I have a line and then a neighbor key. First line, first space, they are neighbors. Then from one line, the first line, to the third line, to the second line. They are not neighbors. From one line I'm jumping this key on the first space, and I'm going to the second line. Then from the first line until the third line, I'm jumping the second line. So first line, I'm jumping the second line and going to the third line. Then exactly the same example for the bass clef. G on the second octave on the first line. Neighbors with the first space. Then from the first line to the second line, I'm jumping the first space. Then from the first line until the third line, I jumped this second line, first line, second, I jumped, I went to the third line. Or random intervals that you can start either from the second space or the third line, from the first line until the fifth line. You can do whatever examples you think that your student is comprehending to show on the first lesson. And the game I like to play with my students, especially the ones that don't seem to get the system and the logic behind the keys on the lines and keys on the spaces, is that I make them relate personally to the system, and I give them the power to create their own musical clef. Like I ask them, either I give them their name, or I ask them what's the first thing that comes to your mind, or like, okay, the space or the sky, okay, let's use a star, or a vegetable, I don't know, a football game. Imagination has no limits, so use it, especially the ones of your students. So I like give an example. Okay, John, let's say you like the sky and the stars, so this is going to be your clef, John. On this clef, on the star clef, on the first line is going to be located the C, the middle C. So if this is the middle C on your clef, on the second line, which key we're going to have? We're jumping the first space and going on the second line. So on the third line, which key we're going to have? G. Same thing goes for the spaces. If this is C, this is going to be D on the first space. On the second space, F, and on the third space, I'm jumping this key and going to the third space, A. And again, the same exercise for this imaginary clef that I relate to the student. If this is C, this is a neighbor key. First line, first space. Then again, first line, second line. I jumped one key. Then first space and a neighbor key, second line. First space, second space, and so forth. So these are some tips for teachers that teach their students how to read music. Make it simple, don't be afraid to introduce both clefs since the first lessons, and show them the simplicity behind the logic of the different musical clefs by using the examples of line, space, etc. And also make them draw with you, because you're talking to their visual part of their brain, what they're going to see and how they're going to interpret what they see. So by writing it down, it will make it much easier and will give them a clearer picture inside their head, what it is that they're seeing here and how should they interpret it in action on the piano keyboard or some other instrument.